The scene is set. Eucalyptus.
Invasive albino king snakes.
Emerald ash borer and its parasitoids.
The world's largest amphibians.
The invasive species that is humans.
The scene is set. One of the most biodiverse places on the planet slowly cruises by on either side as the quiet yet persistent bubbling of the two-stroke engine pushes you further down the river basin. The sounds of 10% of the world's biodiversity meshes into a cacophony of beautiful music in your ears, overwhelming your senses. The melodic hum of life grinds to a halt, shattered by a crashing wave of force that pushes all before it out of the way as it disappears below the surface, leaving only a boat-turning ripple in its wake. And hello, nerds! We're not even going to talk about how many takes it took to get me through that one. But I am excited to be here today, and I hope you are too, Kirsten.
I am always excited to be here with you, Nicholas.
We can just accept that as truth. So,
oh, hey.
This is our first episode back, official episode back in a while. So hopefully we can get through this without any sort of issues, but unlikely because I'm still kind of recovering from COVID. I hired a new intern yesterday, which required me to talk a lot for the first time since I came down with the old Rona. So I don't have an insane voice, which seems to be a theme for this season. For one reason or another, I seem to just never have a voice. So let's start, shall we? Because I think this is probably going to be one of my most favorite episodes that we've had so far. And I'm not just saying that to get everybody's attention so that you continue to listen, but it's going to be different for a handful of reasons that I'll get into. And one of them doesn't really have anything to do with the episode, but I'm just going to try and kind of stay less on script and kind of deviate and have it more of me actually talking about the topic versus just reading directly off a piece of paper, which I have done in the past. And I will continue to do so, but I will try to avoid doing it so extensively. I'm just let's be honest, I'm just lazy and I don't like editing out all the natural pauses and ums that I have when I'm free thinking versus when I'm reading off of something. So, without further word vomit from my mouth, let's get into it. So, today we're going to take an incredibly unique trip well out of my comfort zone for many reasons. Not only are we leaving the United States for the first time in quite a while for one of these episodes, that I've done anyway, but we're actually leaving the realm of basic invasive species understanding. So we're getting outside of how we understand invasive species and how they typically function in an ecosystem. This invasive species that we're going to discuss is, for all intents and purposes, completely unique and separate from other species of invasive species throughout the world. And I'm not just exaggerating. That's genuine. And you'll see why. This entire episode is basically focusing both on this invasive species, but also the reasons why that they are so drastically different from other species throughout the world.
So yeah, it's big.
Right, yeah, literally. So obviously right off the bat, it's like a pretty big claim for one small ecologist to make, but it is true. We're in totally uncharted waters here. Not literally, these are very charted waters, as we'll get into learning about. But just to refresh everyone's memory, invasive species are usually successful because they're animals that are small and easily transported to new areas via trade or accidental introduction. These species often reproduce quickly and have different advantages that make them incredibly successful in these non-native ecosystems. I mean, everything we've talked about for the most part is a small, super successful animal. Or plant, for that matter. And I guess just off the top of your head, Kirsten, how many exceptionally large invasive species can you think of? And I mean, I guess in the form of what I mean is large invasive species that are animals. Because obviously trees get large.
Yeah. I mean, it's also the bigger they are, in theory, it can be easier to control them because it's easier to see them there. But I'm thinking goats in Galapagos is one. And then camels in Australia, and that's all I got. So
Right, yeah. And I'm like
Yeah.
notoriously bad at naming things like that when I'm put on the spot, so which is why I put you on the spot. But honestly, it's like it's really difficult for me to like think of anything. I guess you could kind of argue that like Burmese pythons are pretty large at adulthood, but even so, they don't really have any comparison to what we're going to be talking about today. And also, obviously, snakes start small. And all right. Well, I guess there's no other way of putting it off anymore. And I'm sure that everybody's just like, just say it. What are we talking about? Because I haven't given any information about what it actually is yet. But there's really no other way of putting this. Today, we are talking about the famous invasive hippopotamus of the Colombian Magdalena River Basin, the largest invasive species on the planet. This episode is going to be different for a lot of reasons, and I should just stop saying that because every single episode I say, this is going to be different for other reasons. But now being different in every episode is so common that it's the normal thing to do. So this is going to be exactly like all the other episodes because it's different. So this is where it gets really fun because I basically get to sit here and describe hippos to people as if everyone in the world isn't already insanely familiar with what a hippopotamus is. So hippopotamus is a giant herbivorous and highly aquatic mammal from Africa. Duh. We all know. We're aware. Sometimes they're referred to the water horse. That's actually what hippopotamus means is water horse, loosely translated. And that's not accurate at all. Really not accurate at all. They're not related to any other of the terrestrial megafauna of Africa either, or anywhere on the planet for that matter, as hippopotamuses' closest living relatives are what?
Oh God, I don't actually even know.
Cetaceans.
Oh.
Whales.
Okay.
They're whales with legs. They're amphibious whales. Yeah,
I
so
guess that makes sense.
so they're not actually amphibious whales, but they're about as close as you can possibly get because they diverged from a common ancestor with whales somewhere around 55 million years ago. So
not even that long.
They're not related to pachyderms. They're not related to horses. They're not related to me, unfortunately. Sometimes I look like a hippo when I don't diet, but moving on. We know a lot about extant hippos. I think at this point, like sitting here and talking about what a hippo is kind of redundant and unnecessary and a waste of our time. So I decided that I'm going to be focusing more on their ancestry in this episode because they're just an absolutely fantastic example of how phenotypic or physical traits are definitely not a good way to categorize how animals evolved or what they're related to. So when we used to describe animals and stuff like that and what their extinct relatives were, before we had like the technology for genetic analysis, we just assumed that this animal looks like this animal, so they must be related. But now we know that convergent evolution goes a big middle finger up at that because it's not the case. Animals that are completely unrelated may have similar adaptations and evolutionary styles that have nothing to do with each other genetically speaking. So, Setacodonta is...
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, just like in the short form, like just because something doesn't look the same doesn't mean it's related. It probably is more likely it looks the same because that form of body is useful in some way.
Exactly. Setacodonta is a group of animals that contains all cetaceans and hippos. So cetaceans are whales, dolphins, and porpoises and things of that nature, just so everybody knows. And obviously all of their relatives. So, however, I'm not just going to sit here and use that nomenclature when there is a much more entertaining group for the name of these animals than Setacodonta. And that is Whippomorpha.
What?
Like whale and hippo? Whippomorpha. I mean, if I emphasize the H, Whippomorpha.
Whippomorpha.
Baba. What?
I tell you what.
Well, we're kind of already off track. May I just note that, like, you know the movie Madagascar, and there's like that scene, and he's like, "I like him round, I like him
chunky."
That's all that's in my head right now, and I can't stop.
Moto. The name's so nice you had to say it twice, and he holds up 3 fingers. Yeah, never seen that movie. Don't know what you're talking about. So, approximately 55 million years ago, hippos and cetaceans broke off from their common ancestor. Most paleo art, which is like artistic depictions of what animals theoretically looked like, and it's also based generally in science, if it's official, portrays these common ancestors as I mean, let's be honest, they don't actually look like anything that we have alive on Earth today. They're kind of just like really aggressive looking wolf pigs, I suppose, and some of which are portrayed as having fur and some of which are not. So I encourage you to just look up Whipomorpha and yeah, there you go. Anyway, returning to the modern era, even large invasive species usually start out small, making them able to be transported or easily escape at captivity or, fish markets and things of that nature. A newborn hippo, for example, weighs in the neighborhood of 100 pounds or 45 kilograms. That is a large animal by any standards. By like an adult invasive species animal, that would be an insanely large invasive species. You're not just carrying that in your backpack on a plane from Africa and lugging it into the Colombian jungle. So how did they get there? In the native habitat, which is the southern 2/3 of Africa, hippopotamus are listed as vulnerable under the IUCN. With a population estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of 125 to 148,000 individuals, which I don't know if that seems like low to you, but that seems like low to me for the entire southern 2/3 of Africa, especially in documentaries where you see like the low water levels where there's like literally thousands of them taking up the river basins. It just seems like that's a low number, but they're also massive animals. So
right.
I'm willing to forgive my, I guess, statistics for proving my perception wrong.
Well, because I think, am I wrong in saying there's two like kind of specific sort of groups of hippos, right? There's like the western.
Well, there's the typical hippo, and then the pygmy hippo.
Okay. Oh, okay. No, but like in the typical hippo, they're kind of like
subspecies,
divided, aren't they? Into like two groups.
Didn't see any information about that, but I will put in a anecdotal voice clip if I can look that up.
Okay, awesome. Anyway.
According to the IUCN, their population has pretty much plateaued since conservation efforts began in the 2000s, which means that within the stable area of their habitat that hasn't been disrupted, it seems like they've reached a population carrying capacity more or less, but also it lists them as population declining. So, asterisk, I suppose.
Okay.
It basically comes as no surprise that the significant population loss that happened in the 90s and early 2000s was a result of both poaching and habitat loss, which is just pretty much par for the course for Africa and their megafauna population reductions. However, I was surprised to hear that most of this did take place in the 90s and 2000s, which is within our lifetime. So that's kind of scary that they had such a drastic population decline. Compared to many of the invasive species we discussed that are doing pretty poor in their native habitat, it does kind of seem like hippos seem to have a bit of a leg up with the active conservation and preservation efforts looking to increase their overall populations. Also, most notably, they are a pretty hardy and intimidating animal, so I feel like they're not as, under as much pressure from certain environmental stressors as smaller invasive species may be in their native habitat. So I guess smaller species.
Like hippos are hella scary. Like,
oh yeah, I talk about that. Don't you worry.
Okay.
Yeah, I got statistics.
All right.
So it's actually the next thing we're talking about here. So hippos have gained fame.
Talk statistics to me. Sorry.
Oh yeah, got getting all hot and heavy up here with the statistics. So hippos have gained fame for many different reasons, and I'm pretty sure everyone has heard of how extremely territorial these animals are. And, we obviously, because you just brought it up, is the first thing when I brought up hippos. So it's probably one of their most notable, I guess, personality traits. It's actually earned them the title of the deadliest animal in Africa, resulting in anywhere between 500 and 3,000 human deaths every year, according to multiple different sources. So these animals, they're known to attack pretty much everything in their path. This includes crocodiles that come into their territory, which are, pretty much the other most intimidating thing I can think of in the waterways of Africa. They do not hesitate to knock over boats, chase after people on land, and in extreme cases, gore them with their massive top incisors and lower canines that they are also very famous for. Does that make these animals aggressive? Well, kinda. Usually I say no in this instance, but it kind of does. But let me explain a little further. ultimately, they're really just defending their territory, and they also happen to have a fair amount of territory. They call them beachmasters. The largest male hippo in the group takes like 200 to 500 yards of coastline that they protect very specifically. So if you're within that territory, for all intents and purposes, they're going to get you the hell out. They are herbivores, though, so they're not actively like predating animals or anything like that. And usually when I talk about aggression in animals, I'm talking about an aggressive predatory response because they're actively trying to hunt and kill something. Most animals do not actively try and hunt humans. So most animals are therefore not aggressive because they don't have that association with us as food. But ultimately, like I said, they're defending their territory. They're just insanely protective of it, which is kind of in the same way that your one uncle is insanely protective of his high school football trophy because that was ultimately when he peaked in his life.
Ooh. I don't know. For me, like for some weird reason, it makes it like worse and scarier that it's like a herbivore that wants to destroy me. You know what I mean? Like if it's like a cat and it's like, hey,
Right.
like this is a snack. But the hippo's just like, I will end you. And
yeah, it's not just
like...
enough to scare you out of here. Like, I will make sure that you and your bloodline end here.
Well, and just not even to eat me. Like, your body will just, like,
right. But what's crazy about them is, like, I love them so much.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that just adds to their charismatic,
they're amazing.
Nature.
They're so charismatic. And I think people just, like, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but the worst, like, people just underestimate because they look so like chunky and like lazy and useless, but they fast. Gotta go fast. Gotta go fast. Gotta go faster, 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 faster.
Yeah, I think like, granted, I was going to look this up, but I didn't actually look up the real statistic, but I swear I read once that they can run like 20 to 30 miles an hour or something like that in like short distances. Ridiculous. You can look that up while I continue on. So there is a lot of negativity and fear surrounding hippos, which is one of the animals where I would say it's pretty well founded, but really they're ecologically vital to the African river systems that they call home. They're important ecological construction workers. Their presence in the ecosystem is actually so impactful that other organisms have evolved around them and are now reliant on their presence because they're just such a massive animal.
Right. I guess, I mean, that's like a lot of large megafauna really transform the ecosystem.
Right, yeah. I do talk about that as well.
So I'm getting 15 to 20 miles per hour, which is like 30,
faster than most people.
Yeah, like 30 kilometers an hour.
Maybe that's what I read was 30 kilometers.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some varying sources, but fast. Gotta go fast. Faster than you
faster
would think.
than most people. Yeah,
Faster
like I don't know if
like
maybe the adrenaline will give me that extra kick, but if that hippo's cruising at 20 miles an hour, I'm not outrunning him for long. So, speaking of running, hippos don't swim. They're so dense and muscular that they basically just run on the bottom of the river systems. They sink to the bottom and they use their insane muscle to run through water. I'm sure everybody has been in the water and tried to run with just their legs underwater, and it slows them down to basically a crawl. Hippos can still cruise at significantly intimidating speeds while completely submerged under the water, and it's terrifying. Look up videos of hippos just creating these massive waves beyond. It's the power is insane. That there's no reason why nobody should be afraid of hippos in their own habitat. Essentially, what all of this means is that they're physically shaping waterways, plant growth, and how other organisms live and function within those ecosystems. Of course, large animals are pretty famous for this. Think of elephants and other African megafauna that have literally shaped the different habitat that they live in, and now those habitats are dependent on their presence to be successful. Again, this is all pretty common knowledge. I think if you have any interest in hippos, or at the very least, it's pretty obvious based on what they are. However, of course, I'm not just going to sit here and give the most surface level information. There's another less pretty ecological role that these animals play, and that is fertilizers. Hippo behavior. Every night, hippos leave the water and graze on land where they consume approximately 1.5% of their body weight in food, which for animals is not actually a lot. Many other animals consume significantly more. Many other herbivores will actually consume significantly higher percentages of their body mass every single day. However, when you consider that these animals can easily weigh over a ton, it averages around 88 pounds or 40 kilograms of food consumed per night per animal, which is a significant amount. Once the food is consumed, they return to the water where the digested food is deposited en masse. This influx of nutrients into the ecosystem is vital to healthy bacterial formation and benthic cycling, which drives water health, plant growth, and ultimately fuels the habitat. This is important information to remember for later. Do you have anything you wanted to say?
Oh, no, just writing it down.
Okay. So I'm sure for many of you listening, you're already completely aware of how these massive African animals reach the seemingly impossible location of Colombia. And that is another way that this particular species is set apart from most invasive species. We know not only the exact place and method of introduction for this particular invasive species, but we can concretely pinpoint the single person responsible for their introduction. And that person is, of course, going to be named right after the break. So we'll see you in a little bit.
Hey everyone, Kirsten here from the Anthropocene. Hope you guys are enjoying this special episode we're having today. We just wanted to give a quick note that if you are interested in starting a podcast, we have in the show notes a affiliate link for Buzzsprout. If you guys go through that link, we actually receive some money for that, and you guys get to start your own podcast, and you get a $20 Amazon gift card as soon as you sign up for a paid account. Buzzsprout also has a great free account, and we love using the tool. This isn't just a plug to make some money. It's so easy. It automatically uploads us to all the directories. It's great. There's lots of storage. It's super easy to use, and they keep coming out with new features all the time to make your website look better, to make it easier for you to manage everything. So give that a look, and thanks for listening.
And welcome back. So I have spent half of this episode beating around the bush, and now it's about time that we address these animals as the invasive species that they are and blame the person responsible. And we do have one person to blame for their introduction, and that is the world-famous king of cocaine himself, Pablo Escobar. Now, this is not a true crime or political podcast. We're not diving far into the details on Pablo Escobar's famous exploits or the real reason that he's, famous. However, he is the wealthiest criminal in history, which allowed him to purchase essentially anything he wanted, and this included an entire zoo that contained exotic animals from literally all over the world. Most were removed and relocated to other facilities after his arrest and death. However, as we've discussed, hippopotamus have a certain reputation. This resulted in several eventually eluding capture and escaping into the nearby Magdalena River Basin. Because who the hell has the capabilities to move and relocate a hippo? Or the desire?
I think you got to have some pretty big tranks, but was there not also a flood that flooded into the enclosure and maybe...
Yeah, but
okay.
the ultimate result, the ultimate reason behind it is that they were not able to be removed, and so they escaped due to the deterioration of the enclosure that they were in.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah.
I guess it's not indirect. Pablo Escobar is indirectly responsible because he brought these hippos into the Colombian jungle at his drug mansion.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, these animals, it was only a few. I think he had eight hippos or something like that at the time, 6 to 8, somewhere in that neighborhood. But over the last 30 or so years since they've escaped, there is now an estimated 60 to 80 individuals within the river basin. And this is also with population steadily increasing as they expand further into the river basin, giving them more access to other resources and places throughout the region, which, as you would imagine, probably is going to lead to some negative effects. Now, I didn't cite this particular thing because I think some of the information in it didn't seem very credible, but it is a published source. But I'm not going to link it. I'm just going to mention this offhandedly and let you do with it what you say. Somebody estimated that the population within the next 20 years could increase well into the thousands. if their population trends and resource availability increases. I don't know the reproductive effectiveness of hippopotamuses.
I was going to say, what is their gestation period?
Right. So, grain of salt. But there's 80 hippos, whatever. Glazing over that fact, the actual statistics are that their population is increasing at a steady rate. Therefore, there is no inhibitors for that population to exponentially increase as it obviously gets bigger. More hippos can produce more hippos than less hippos can produce. This is the simplest way of putting that. Anyway.
8 months.
Yeah, so basically a people. So, or if you're me, 7. So anyway, obviously a population of 80 individuals doesn't really sound like much when we're talking about an invasive species, but I would classify this as the beginning of a big problem. Also, it's not like this is not 80 species of insects or plants. This is 80 massive earth-shaping megafauna with serious implications for environmental impact. So 80 is more of an, I guess, measurably so. If you're looking at pounds of invasive species, that's a lot of pounds or kilograms of invasive species. This is a thick boys. So it's scientifically speaking. Africa and its animals have had millions of years to evolve alongside these massive species in their native habitat. The plants, waterways, and other animals are fully capable of living alongside and adapting to the presence of hippos. A jungle with high levels of biodiversity like Colombia, most of which are not megafauna or large animals at all, is particularly susceptible to the presence of a large herbivore. For many reasons, which I will get into. Probably now. I don't know. Maybe. I haven't read through this. This is the first time I'm doing this. So, yeah. Got a lot of energy out of nowhere. So, off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure... Oh, crap. Okay, what would the largest animal in Colombia be, right?
No, I'm trying to think because I was just gonna say
jaguar.
Surprisingly, in the Amazon and in all the jungles, there's not of large. Yeah, no, for example,
there is not a lot of real megafauna because every little niche is so small.
I'm thinking Brazil, the capybara is one of the biggest things you get, and in Colombia, you're getting a jaguar. The caimans can get kind of big. The bears, the Andean bears don't really live in that area.
They're in Colombia.
Don't really have, but they're more in the Sierra, in the highlands.
I'm talking about the whole of Colombia. As a country, Colombia only has 2 that I can think. Giant anteaters. 3. Yeah, 3 that I can think of.
Yeah,
but really,
bears,
and in the grand scheme of things.
Deer is the biggest herbivore they have, I'm pretty sure.
Right. Grand scheme of things, if we're looking at megafauna, those are not big megafauna.
No.
So, and then compared to a hippo, tiny. Minuscule, really. So, the easiest way to categorize the negative impacts of hippopotamus in Colombia is to just reverse their positive impacts in Africa.
The biggest animal in Colombia is the condor.
Oh, yeah. Is it? Yeah, okay.
Technically, I think. Yeah. So.
In this introduced habitat, they're shaping ecosystems that do not function in tandem with megafauna, meaning they're shaping ecosystems in a way that they should not be shaped. They're consuming large biomasses of plants that are not meant to be grazed with that intensity, and they're taking those nutrients with them into an ecosystem that hasn't had to handle that level of nutrient loading or abundance, and at least not in a consistent manner. They're bringing a lot of nutrients in a short period of time, consistently. There are several studies we'll have linked in the show notes that are already showing the impacts of excess nutrients brought into the lakes in Colombia via hippo excretions that are having, or showing the negative impacts that the hippo excretions are having on these lake ecosystems in Colombia. There's also a study that looks at the impacts of overabundance of hippo dung within their native habitat. So during periods of high hippo concentration and low water abundance, so when the water is reduced, there's going to be more hippos in that area. Their dung can form visible surface layers, and the presence of that many nutrients can lead to benthic collapse and hypoxia in really extreme conditions. And this isn't their native habitat. So this is like habitat that has evolved alongside hippos, still can't handle a lot of hippo shit. This is largely based on like times of drought, obviously, where hundreds or thousands of hippos are condensed into an incredibly shallow water body. And this creates an overabundance of fecal matter, which is not necessarily something that would disrupt these ecosystems permanently or consistently, which is probably why it's not necessarily a problem. It's more of a localized effect that results from certain conditions. However, with increased drought conditions due to climate change and habitat shrinkage from development, I do wonder if these high concentrations are becoming more severe and detrimental, but that's not really the focus of what we're looking at today. I'm just curious if like maybe they're having these negative impacts and actual effects on the ecosystems because the drought conditions are exacerbated by climate change. I mean, that would make sense, but also not what we're looking at. Moving on, this is one of those cases where it's pretty cut and dry as far as management strategies go. I mean, like when you think about it, it seems like there's an obvious answer. Control would theoretically be incredibly easy because you can literally find and eliminate a 3,000 pound or 1,300 kilogram non-native amphibious whale with relative ease, especially in the low numbers that are present. There is irrefutable proof that their numbers are in a steady incline. They're spreading further down the river basin. They have possible negative impacts on people and visible impacts on the ecosystems. And from an ecological perspective, control should be quick, easy, and effective, right? That was not a rhetorical question I was asking.
Oh, I mean, I was going to say it's one of those things, where it seems like it's really, really easy, but I've been living in South America for quite a while now, so I'm sure there is some colorful.
I've been living on this planet for long enough to know that somebody's going to fuck it up. And it's us. Why wouldn't it be? Not us, not me and Kirsten, but us.
I'm sorry, I am personally responsible for the lack of eradication.
Yeah, she's out there picketing the hippo euthanization. And yeah.
Lo siento.
Right. Well, this is the Anthropocene, so of course we're going to make everything about ourselves, so let's do that. Rather than having a full debate on this topic like we typically do, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the number one reason why these animals have been allowed to live and proliferate within this river basin?
Because people don't want them killed.
Elaborate.
Because the government has gone in to kill them, and then people are like, no, but they're hippos and they're so cool. Tourism, maybe a little bit, and then mostly just hippies, I think, probably.
Bingo. Yeah, they're charismatic megafauna. And they're charismatic megafauna in an area that doesn't really have a whole lot of large animals. We've talked about charismatic megafauna in the past. We've talked about charismatic megafauna in this episode. But just as a refresher to everyone, these are just animals that are incredibly large and noticeable and often get the most environmental protection and support from the general public because of their recognizable size and features. That's what a charismatic megafauna is. So your elephants, rhinos, panda bears, capybaras, anything like that, the things that we love and know, that's like typically where conservation efforts go to. People identify with them because we're technically, I wouldn't call us charismatic, but we're megafauna. I'm charismatic megafauna. Present company excluded. We're not all charismatic megafauna. There's some pretty uncharismatic people. So, sorry, anyway, basically what I'm saying is even though Colombia may be one of the most biologically diverse places on the entire planet, many of those animals are super cryptic, hyper niche specific, and less appealing to the general tourist populations, aka the normies. So you have to work harder to find these animals that really less people want to see. Even the few large animals that Colombia does have are exceptionally reclusive under immense environmental pressure. Jaguars. You can't see those. You've also got the bears, which are only in a very specific part of Colombia, meaning that like what you said before was a good point to bring up because like tourists in the tropical part of Colombia are not going to really be seeing all of the different megafauna species. You got to travel to do that.
One that I totally forgot about, which is close-ish to a hippo, is like the tapirs, but those are so reclusive too.
Are they
Like,
in Colombia?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe you.
So I forgot
Yeah.
about them because we have them here.
Related
and they
to
get quite
rhinos,
big, but
actually.
they get fairly big. We have one here at the like zoo slash rescue center in Quito that I just finally went to the other day, and yeah, they're quite big, but they're super super reclusive and hard to find too. So
Yeah. And they also bit that one lady's arm off. Anyway, so
a tapir.
yeah, for real facts. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, so you've got, now a massive charismatic megafauna that is easily found and of course can be monetized for tourism. So not only these animals have the giant size draw, but these animals have a story. They're a remnant of Colombia's largest claim to fame, other than the 10% of the world's biodiversity, but the giant, most famous drug lord in the world, which is what, for whatever reason, people give a shit about.
Which is very, like, we're not going to get into too much because of the politics. It's very, like, difficult and saddening. Like, I know a lot of people from Colombia, and it's, like, a very difficult part of their history and very traumatizing.
Yeah, which is another reason I didn't want to get into it, because, like, a lot of people... right, a lot of people in Colombia see, Pablo Escobar as, like, a Robin Hood-esque type figure. So obviously there's a lot of negative connotations to the things he did and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of it's politicized and you don't necessarily know what's true and what's false. And a lot of people do think that he did a lot of good for the Colombian people. There's like 25,000 people in his attendance at his funeral or something like that, or more. Maybe it was more than that. I don't know. I read a statistic once and I'm reciting it.
But then also too, there's so many people that were so damaged by like what happened during that time too. So.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was literally one of the most violent places in the world during that time period. So
yeah.
But yeah, we're not going to get into it any more than we just did. Yeah. So this is another difference that separates these invasive species versus other invasive species that we talked about. They're wanted. People want them there. They're appreciated and loved. And of course, there's another one, which I'll talk about, but this is a pretty novel thing, right? So because you've got the inherent ecological destruction that is coming from the presence of these giant animals and their nutrient cycling, but now you've got undoubtedly an influx of tourism driving people and companies through the forest to see these animals. That's also impacting and fragmenting the habitat in and around where these hippopotamuses are present. Mm-hmm. And also you've got cats that people love, but we're not going to get on that soapbox this episode. That's for another episode. But other than that, most people hate invasive species and want to get rid of them.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking it would be like if, I don't know, in southern Canada and like in Alberta or something, we had like a population of like pygmy elephants, like, and they were screwing up the prairie. You think people are going to let you go shoot the elephants?
Hell no.
Not even close. So. Yeah.
So obviously I talked about like the tourism and stuff like that is going to be impacting the forest from the tourism based on these hippos. But there's probably already ecological impact surrounding Escobar's compound, which is now turned into a tourist attraction. Like you can go see his like famous mansion. But the hippos are going to be moving further and further into the Colombian waterways, and as they do so, so will the tourism. So as the hippos move, they bring the destruction with them both directly and indirectly. It's a serious positive feedback loop that is just pointing to more exponential environmental damages, because obviously they have their direct impacts on the environment, but also they're bringing tourism, which is an indirect impact on the environment. So I know there are probably some people who are going to be out there listening and thinking that they're going to throw down the rewilding card right about now, and I'm going to not ignore that. I genuinely feel that we will do an entire episode on rewilding at some point. I would assume that that's probably on our list of things to accomplish in the future, and we've talked about it in a few cases. However, I'm not going to go into an exceptional amount of detail in this episode specifically, but I'm going to address it. So Kirsten, would you actually like to explain the basic idea of rewilding as an ecological and management strategy?
Yeah, I think I got this today. So rewilding.
I'm glad you didn't just say no. I kind of bagged on you saying yes.
So I mean, like restoration in general, a lot of times if we think about restoration, say we mined a place and we go in and we put the plants back that should have been back and that kind of thing. But rewilding is reintroducing the fauna into that area that are important to and shaping the ecosystem. So you are restoring an ecosystem, and you're restoring it by reintroducing things that should be there that will also help to reshape the ecosystem to how it was supposed to be.
Right. So you're basically filling lost ecological niche of extinct, generally megafauna with extant or still living species that would fit the same or similar roles. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like, like you said, extinct from that area, but then you're bringing them back in.
Right, yeah. And I'm going to go into a little more detail, too, using examples. But I just wanted to have you cover it, basically, just so everybody has a fundamental understanding of it who may not already have that. So there are actually pretty, like, a lot of studies that are being done right now on rewilding efforts. And we're not going to go into those right now. For the sake of staying on track, let us just say that rewilding efforts have varying degrees of effectiveness because you're using animals that fit the ecological niche of extinct animals to varying degrees. To be more specific and explain that a little better, I think I'll use an example because that is a concept that is a little bit obscure. So let's use the species of horses in the United States that existed here in the Pleistocene, which are now extinct. All of our native horse species in the U.S. are extinct. Horses, being megafauna, obviously played important ecological roles such as grazing and compaction and things of that nature, and obviously food sources, but yeah. So we do still have wild horses in the U.S. today. However, they're just of Spanish horse descent. So all of the wild horses present in the Americas originate from Spain, genetically speaking. Also, semi-anecdotally, according to the fossil record, the genus that comprises the Spanish horses probably originated in the Americas somewhere around 5 million years ago and then spread throughout Eurasia via an ancient land bridge. So the ancient horses that were the species that were present in the United States then moved to Eurasia, diversified to become new species, and then were brought back here by human means. So it's pretty safe to say that they're occupying a very similar ecological niche to their extinct American relatives. I think that's a pretty fair assumption. Obviously not it's not a complete overlap, but it's close.
Neat.
And then, of course, the antithesis of that, a poor example, is if you're taking two animals that don't have that extremely similar niche overlap and attempting to fill that niche with extant species that can never truly fill that ecological role. For example, how would you theoretically fill the ecological niche that was once occupied by woolly mammoths and giant sloths? You know what I mean? Like, they don't exist. Nothing like those things exist. Yeah, sure, elephants. What are you going to do? Bring elephants to the U.S. and be like, go crazy, fam. You know, it's not going to work in the colder climates.
Have fun with winter.
This brings up just another point that I want to touch on. At what point do you cut off rewilding efforts as far as, like, time frame goes? What I mean by this is, if you're trying to restore ecosystems to habitat that was present before human presence, where in the geologic timescale do you cut that off and just say this ecosystem role is functionally extinct and cannot be refilled or recreated effectively without harming the current ecosystem? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, when do you say, like, for example, there's new research that shows that humans really didn't have a huge negative impact on mammoth decline. It was actually climate change that caused a massive change in habitat that reduced their numbers in a very short period of time. And humans had little to no effect on the extinction of mammoths. Fun facts. So that would technically be a natural extinction event, right? However, many people consider rewilding methods to be bringing back mammoths, but those mammoths would be functionally extinct nowadays, naturally speaking, without human impacts. So where's the cutoff, and how far back do we go? Because obviously if you cut out all human impacts, there's still massive climate changes and stuff like that. So what is natural is the biggest, I guess, argument against rewilding efforts. And that's why it makes it such a very difficult subject to discuss and talk about, which is why we're going to do a whole episode on it sometimes, probably, maybe. I don't know. Also, just in case anyone feels that this episode is light on me directly citing content, fear not. I'm about to directly cite content because I know that some people are very adamant about that. But obviously, everything that I'm referencing is in the show notes unless I say otherwise. So, Shurin et al. In 2020, Castelblanco Martinez et al. In 2021, and Subileski et al. Also in 21, all quantify the potential negative impacts the introduction of hippos have on the Colombian ecosystems. And there's plenty more where those came from. I just figured I'd reference studies published within the last couple of years just to give an idea of the fact that, like, yeah, people are actually quantifying the effects of these hippos on the ecosystems. Therefore, they are negative, and rewilding efforts, as you know, because I don't know if you've heard about this, but a lot of people have said, like, oh no, the hippos are actually having positive impacts on the ecosystem in Colombia. I've heard that.
I haven't heard it.
But I couldn't really find any sources to support it. However, there are a lot of studies that show that more information is needed. Obviously, this is still a pretty novel study thing since their numbers have begun to grow more.
Arguably, ecotourism can save more jungle from being used for petroleum and other resource extractions. So, like, that's a whole can of worms.
Right, exactly. Open, which I ain't touching, not today.
I'm just gonna say that just to throw it out there.
Right. No, I think it's a good point to bring up. So typically in each episode, we're gonna discuss ongoing management strategies, and as of now, there are not any. There are not any management strategies put in place, but there are definitive measures that multiple sources have laid out as far as current management goes. So multiple people have given suggestions as to management strategies. Mm-hmm. With these hippos, there's currently the luxury of having a relatively known low population of large, easily detectable animals like we've discussed. And we also discussed this a bit in the snakehead episode, but it's always going to be financially beneficial to tackle a problem before it gets out of hand. Mm-hmm. Which, if you allow this hippo problem to get out of hand, and because you don't control it at all to any degree, there's going to be massive ecological impacts. So those are going to cost a lot more. Now, on the surface, it may seem like the most financially effective method of control would just be to find all the hippos and euthanize them quickly and indiscriminately. And if we're talking about overall financial loss, I agree that this is probably the most fiscally responsible method of control and also the most effective. Mm-hmm. However, we've got some charismatic megafauna that we love just so much, and they're truly embraced and accepted by the public. Realistically, this goes above the best management practices because you can't just go around euthanizing animals that people love, no matter how ecologically devastating they may be. Cats. Sorry, I must have had some salt in my throat. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what's the solution then? Well, there isn't one, but there also are some, but just because there's a solution doesn't mean it's accepted. So, first off, population control. Clearly, the animals are widely accepted and utilized for economic prosperity. This is known. This is accepted. This is understood. However, that remained the case when they numbered just a few, right? And will remain if numbers are controlled. There's already a love for these hippos. Does there need to be more? They loved them when there was a few of them. They love them when there's now. Is there any need for the population to continue growing? Just some food for thought. What's the obvious solution to achieve this? Sterilization, right? Seems like an obvious answer. So with most invasive species, sterilization is wildly ineffective. Let me just repeat that for the TNR people in the chat. Wildly ineffective. And this is because of the sheer number of animals that come with an invasive species population. However, like we've said before, and I've specified for this episode, hippos are not like any other invasive species. This is different. So this is a small, confined population of easily detectable animals that aren't gonna just vanish. You're gonna know where they're at to, some degree. So sterilization could theoretically be implemented prior to their inevitable population explosion, and you could still achieve all of the love and, tourism and stuff for these animals without letting their populations get out of control. On top of that, why not dedicate funds to the capture and removal of some of these animals? They would still be famous and draw a crowd in captivity while removing both the ecological impacts of the potential danger of people that would otherwise, encounter them in the wild, because people do live along this river system. Exposing them to wild hippos is going to be dangerous for their health. So that's also something to consider, that not everybody is going to be happy with these hippos' presence, chiefly the people who have to live alongside them now. So what I'm basically saying is, why not take some of these hippos and put them in a zoo? There's still the cocaine hippos, and then you can just go see them. And that also doesn't require the tourism to be trampling through the jungle to find these things and, all of that added extra stuff. So obviously that does seem like a pretty good solution, correct? Mm-hmm. Well, fun facts. Apparently it's not. So there was a piece published in the Israel Journal of Ecology and Evolution by Dembitzer in 2017 that claimed castration of all males may prove to be completely ineffective. So the problem is not only one in terms of funding to conduct this, which is cited repeatedly as the main problem for the prevention of the implementation of, let me not be so big word about that. Basically, there's not enough money to fund removal efforts or control efforts for this invasive species. So the problem isn't really just funding, but they are these massively dangerous animals that typically form large groups and spend most of their time in the water. So you have to think about the process that would it take to get these hippopotamuses castrated. It's hippopotamuses, by the way. It's not hippopotami.
Oh, it's not.
Although, it's hippopotamuses, like octopuses.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about how large hippo testicles must be.
Coming soon to our OnlyFans. So what would you have to do to effectively castrate these animals and make sterilization an effective technique? Well, theoretically, you would need to get a male away from the herd or find one of the lone mature males, because when males reach maturity, they often go off and form their own groups. That way, there's no inter-male competition in each of the individual family groups. You would have to get these males away from the other males or find one and then carry it to a place where first off, you'd have to tranquilize it and then carry it to a place where they can get castrated. Or castrate them in the field. And also, there's the added difficulty of the fact that hippos have a chemical sensitivity that means that a tranquilizer can easily kill them. So they can't be tranquilized without a high percentage of them succumbing to that chemical instability and dying, which is obviously not good, because obviously these animals are loved. So the other thing is sterilization must be done at a 100% success rate because of that Beachmaster type of reproduction I talked about a little bit before, where one male just fertilizes all the females. If one male is left unfertilized, then it will just go back and fertilize all the females. So, and that's one of the main problems with sterilization efforts in invasive species across the board, is that it has to be 100% effective. And what we know about invasive species control is methods that have to be 100% effective are not effective.
Yeah.
This is one of those situations that it's incredibly difficult to navigate. After just one hippo was euthanized by a culling effort, because it was done, there was one hippo that was shot. There was a massive public outcry that brought the euthanization of all the other hippos to a complete halt. So sterilization and euthanasia are both unlikely options now. It's not something that's going to be able to be done.
Right.
So what about relocation? Well, there's now two limiting factors in relocation, which is money and transportation. You're going to need a lot of funding to remove these animals, and practically speaking, how is it even possible? Again, we've talked about how big and aggressive hippos are. You can't just go and pluck 80 hippos out of the water, throw a leash on them, and walk them to a zoo. There needs to be heavy equipment, helicopters, trucks, etc. Plus, how do you move animals that weigh over a ton without tranquilizing them for fear of killing them? So you'd have to move these massive animals. First, you'd have to get these animals out of the water, and they are in groups. They're huge. They're aggressive. You have to not tranquilize them, get them in things that can carry them to other places. So what do you do? Honestly, this incredibly unique invasive species may be one of the most difficult things to navigate. So let's have a discussion about it. I haven't planned any opinions or stances, and this is Kirsten's first time officially learning about this. I kept her in the dark the entire time. I had a slip up before the episode on accident, and she guessed what it was about. But originally, I was going to surprise her with the topic, but my big mouth got the better of me. So let's see what both of our ideas on the best methods of control would be. And do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Well, I'll just go. I don't have too much to say. Definitely. I mean, yeah, at first I was like, yeah, sterilization. And then, of course, that doesn't make sense because it's just like such an insane effort. And removal sounds good too, but it would all have to be 100% by helicopter because these places are all so remote and pretty much all accessed by canoes.
Which is money.
The ones with like motors on them, but they're, you have
two-stroke,
really
small.
difficult access. Resources in the whole world are difficult, and then you get into South America and trying to get the proper resources for restoration and biology and those kind of things are just ridiculous. So I mean, I think a certain amount of culling just needs to be done, but unfortunately we can't do things like that if the public is in complete absolute outcry. So I mean, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here, but if we could like educate people on how much, get people to love that natural biodiversity more, and then educate them on how much the hippos are really destroying that, is a very long term but only solution, in my opinion.
Right. Well, I'm going to be honest, I didn't expect you to say exactly what I was going to say, like pretty much verbatim. So this is not going to be much of a discussion, I suppose. So this is the end of the episode too. So, but I'll just elaborate a little bit on what you said. But yeah, I think that the only viable option in this situation, which is in many cases with invasive species, an unfortunate, but statistically the only method that makes any sense is euthanasia. Now, I do understand the importance of ecotourism and the presence and also the perceptions that the people of Colombia have about these hippos. As an American, it is not my place to say the positive associations that some people may have with these hippos. And therefore, the leaving of some of them, I think, is completely forgivable. The educational aspect is a huge component of it, because not only do you need to educate them about the importance of their own ecosystem and biodiversity, but you need to educate them about the destructive potential that these hippopotamus have. You have to both get them to love the native biodiversity, but also, excuse me, but also understand the importance of it and how the hippos can negatively impact that, which is pretty much what I just said twice. But
yeah, well, and so sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
think also not just the local people, but the tourists, right? Like if somebody comes and they're like, "Oh, we want to see the hippos," you're like, "Yes, absolutely," but
right,
like to do note
and
these things.
It can't just be about biodiversity, because some people just frankly don't care. Mm-hmm. So you have to relate it to people, and the easiest way to do that is to say there are people that live along this river basin. When these hippopotamuses get to this point, they can quite literally kill people. They are an insanely deadly animal. Though they may not look it on the surface via the tourism and stuff like that, they have the potential and capacity and statistics to kill people. As their numbers grow, these encounters are going to be only more frequent, and maybe that will be the unfortunate turning point where euthanasia is more of a viable option. But ideally, education would step in prior to that and say, this is the potential for things happening, and maybe they'll handle it better than the American public about warning information from scientists, and they'll take it into account and say, yes, we actually do want to prevent this, rather than just sit around and wait for something bad to happen. So I think that's, you hit the nail on the head with everything. And since we both came to the same conclusion, then it must be the only option. No, that's not necessarily true. There are probably other options by experts who are literally studying this, who can say that, okay, this is a better option. There are so many insanely novel and diverse control methods for invasive species around the world that I would not be surprised if somebody was like, in the next few years, came with a management strategy that is something that nobody would ever think of, or at least I would never think of. So right now, again, we're still in the very beginning of this. Although it's been 30 odd years since they were released, there's still a small population, but it is time to step in and start doing control methods for the preservation of both the people of Colombia and the biodiversity that is present in Colombia, because this invasive species, there's data to show that they have direct negative impacts on this ecosystem by bringing in these excess nutrients and disrupting it directly by consuming and depositing and moving through these ecosystems and destroying them, which is obviously not going to be good for the flora and the fauna that call them home. So on that note, we're going to kind of leave it up in the air, and I'm curious to hear what interesting, I guess, control methods that our listeners might have. I think that would be cool to kind of outsource some information and see if anybody comes up with anything super interesting or unique, because I love to hear that type of stuff. And obviously, Kirsten and I have a very similar mindset. So I would love there to be an option other than euthanasia. If anybody has ideas about that, that'd be awesome. And then I'll send them over to the Colombian government, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, you're closer. It's your job.
Yeah, I can. I'll translate. We can do a bonus follow-up episode if we get some cool responses from people.
Yeah, we can throw it in a snip or something too.
I mean, also just like your opinions on the issue and some neat things. You guys can send us messages. You could send voice notes if you want to actually be your voice in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, let us know. Hit us up.
Right. And thank you for joining us for another episode. And we will see you next time.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Anthropocene.
Be sure to follow us on all social media and feel free to reach out to us with any comments, corrections, or suggestions for future episodes or species you'd like to see us cover.
So, blah, I lost my place. For the steak, I've spent half this episode. I've spent half of this appetizer